This video is brought to you by Nvidia RTX Remix, enabling modders to remaster classic games with full ray tracing, Nvidia DLSS, Nvidia Reflex, and more. The Half-Life 2 RTX demo is now live, allowing you to experience for yourself just how powerful this toolset is and how much it can transform games. To learn more about it, click the link below or stick around to the end of the video. Gamers, apology that this show is a day late this week. Honest truth is that I was working on my AC Shadows review. It's a big game and I needed to roll credits on it before I could review it. And then I wasn't happy with the script, so I had to rewrite it, yada yada. Anyway, that's all in the past now. The review is live on the channel and it's a neat segue into our first block because I think the biggest news of the week is the release of Assassin's Creed Shadows and the drama surrounding Ubisoft as it goes into this pivotal week. So the game is now out on shelves and it's a title that will be a pivotal factor in Ubisoft's outlook over the next year, following a very lackluster 2024. That was the year Star Wars Outlaws sold well below expectations. Ubisoft cancelled an essentially brand new multiplayer shooter in X-Defiant. Skull and Bones was a critical and commercial flop, and while all of this was going on, Ubisoft was closing several studios and effecting rounds of layoffs. Predictably, all of this led to declining share prices, angry shareholders, and whispers of a buyout behind closed doors. All of this gave Ubisoft one hell of an incentive to really get their shit together for Assassin's Creed Shadows. If you remember, they delayed Shadows twice to try to avoid the same kind of technical issues that Star Wars Outlaws faced at launch. They also canned their season pass and their garbage paid early access thing that everyone seems to be doing these days in favor of a same-day launch for everyone and free post-launch expansions for all. Plus, they also committed to releasing all of their future games on Steam on day one. Absolutely love to see that. All of that was to make sure Assassin's Creed Shadows would have the best possible shot at pleasing the biggest possible audience, and while we don't yet know how the punters have responded to it, the critic scores are in, and it seems like Ubisoft have done a pretty good job. At the time of writing, Assassin's Creed Shadows is sitting at an open critic score of 81, and it's really notable that there isn't a huge amount of variance between these scores either. There's a small handful of outliers, but the bulk is sitting in that kind of 8 to 9 out of 10 range, like Eurogamer, who scored this one 4 out of 5 stars, saying, quote, "Shadows' version of Japan is perhaps Ubisoft's most spectacular open world to date, and designed to be explored in a more organic fashion. Missions typically no longer direct you by default to a specific location, and Ubisoft has grounded your Eagle drone. Instead, they provided you with clues, able to narrow your search by pinging your map using scouts, and then left to use Shadow's new Observe mechanic, essentially Eagle Vision, but for quests and treasure. All this while Shadows also constantly tries to tempt you slightly off course to investigate something else you might find along the way, or watch something happening in the game's world you may not see twice," end quote. Of course, there were some harsher write-ups like that from Jewel Shockers. Here's what they had to say, quote, "The story is presented in weirdly placed exposition dumps and a handful of plot twist moments that are rarely shocking or are completely out of absolutely nowhere, so their impact is completely missed. Nothing is resolved, nor is it properly explained. At best, these crucial story beats were hidden somewhere in the bloat of hundreds of side quests that I felt no desire to play, and at worst, they simply are exactly what they seemed, unexplained, out of nowhere nonsense," end quote. Many of the reviewers I personally watched seem to echo these more critical sentiments. People like Mr. Matty Plays, G-Man Lives, ACG, Mortismal Gaming, Jake Baldino of GameRanks. None of these people were given Shadows a ringing endorsement, and a number of them were flat out not recommending it. I personally fell into a similar spot. If you haven't seen my review yet, it's up on the channel, link below the like button. I was ultimately just like, look, it's up to you, man. Like, you know what this is. There are some surface level improvements here that people who enjoy this series are going to really appreciate, but there's still a lot of residual bloat and copy and paste world design and bad quest design and sloppy combat and terrible, terrible writing. It's a modern day Assassin's Creed game, you know? So if you're up for that, then I think you're gonna like this one. But if you are hoping for a more meaningful evolution of this franchise, then you, my friend, better hope that Assassin's Creed Hex delivers, because this one certainly did not. Stepping back from all this, there's obviously going to be a lot of focus on how well AC Shadows does or does not sell, since there's obviously a huge amount riding on this one for Ubisoft. Initial day one numbers seem to be promising though, with Ubisoft reporting that the game has already surpassed 1 million total players, though they didn't specify how many of those players were actual sales versus people playing on Ubisoft's subscription service. Steam charts are really the only other metric we can go on, and they're a little harder to read given this was a midweek launch, and the big numbers usually happen on a weekend. Day one though, Shadows peaked at around 40,000 concurrent players, and that's definitely a pretty low number for a release like this, but like I said, way too early to judge, so we'll need to see how things go over the weekend. Regardless, you do get the sense that no matter how well Shadows does or does not sell, shit's about to go down at Ubisoft. The latest from Ubisoft's exploration of strategic options to win over their shareholders comes from Bloomberg, who reports that one of the ideas being tossed around behind the scenes is to actually spin out its core IPs, including Assassin's Creed, into a whole new entity, while the founding Gilmore family gets to stay in charge of Ubisoft, whatever Ubisoft becomes after a split like that. This kind of sounds like the thing Embracer did when they were going through a tough time. They split out their business into 3 distinct companies and saddled all of the debt and bad mojo into the one best equipped to deal with it. Bloomberg sources say Ubisoft has been asking around to see who would be interested to invest in an entity like this, and Tencent is of course on the roster, given that they've been put at the very top of the most likely to buy a Ubisoft list. Also, here's an interesting tidbit. This new entity, quote, may seek a valuation for the yet to be formed IP unit that is higher than the size of the main company, end quote. This is no doubt a reflection of Ubisoft's considerable overheads, where investors look at the company's headcount of nearly 20,000 people and say, no thank you, but they'd happily sign on to an entity with absolutely zero overhead and lots of juicy IP that can be licensed out. Now, Ubisoft did issue a generic statement in response to this report, saying they're continuing to review options to, quote, extract the best value from Ubisoft's assets and franchises for all stakeholders, end quote. But one thing is clear, some of the stakeholders are kind of getting sick of hearing that line over and over again, and they want to know what the hell's going on. The CEO of an investment firm called AJ Investment kicked up a stink this week, putting Ubisoft on blast by saying that they're horribly managed and they demanded better communication for shareholders and a clearer roadmap for recovery after 4 years of declining value. They reckon Ubisoft hasn't been forthcoming enough with their acquisition talks, allegedly with companies like Microsoft and EA in the mix, and they say they're going to give Ubisoft until May until they rally other shareholders together and hold a full-blown demonstration and succession-like coup. Not the first time Ubisoft's management has had to stare down hostile investor activity. Speaking of big IP sales, did you hear that the Saudis just bought Pokémon Go? It's true. Talks of the deal were floating around a bit before it happened, and at the end of the day, the US mobile publisher Scopely bought Niantic's game catalog, including Pokémon Go, Pikmin Bloom, and Monster Hunter Now for a whopping $3.5 billion. Pokémon Go development team is apparently going to remain intact with the same leadership. The community still isn't particularly jazzed about this one, mostly because if you know Scopely's games, you know they have some pretty aggressive mobile monetization strategies at work, and there's fear that Pokémon Go's worst days are yet to come. Scopely's best-known mobile game is probably Monopoly Now, and they also do Marvel Strike Force and the shameless Fall Guys knockoff Stumble Guys. There's also that little tidbit that Scopely is wholly owned by the Savvy Games Group, which has direct ties to the government of Saudi Arabia, a regime that has tried to ingratiate itself to the world through significant investment in sports, esports, games, and culture. They've got their finger in Capcom esports, Nintendo, Take-Two, EA, not Embracer Group though. Savvy decided last minute to pull out of a multi-billion-dollar investment deal with Embracer, which was what started the cascade of closures and cancellations all those years ago. The CEO still has a job though, despite the fact that hundreds of his now former staff do not. Pivoting now to the exciting and largely bullshit world of AI, Microsoft has announced that the Copilot AI companion they forced onto everyone's Windows computer earlier in the year is coming to Xbox very soon. They spent a really big chunk of the latest Xbox podcast talking to Microsoft's VP of Gaming AI about this one and running through a bunch of examples about how it might be integrated, like asking Copilot for crafting recipes in Minecraft, asking what Overwatch characters to pick, and asking it for strategies about how to get better after they die in Overwatch, to which the AI replies, "Get good." Finally, a good AI. No, it didn't actually say that. You're still going to have to rely on Party Chat to tell you that. So this is kind of interesting, but when you take a closer look at these examples Microsoft's provided, they're still just making all of this stuff up. Every case study they cited as part of this announcement had a disclaimer that they were conceptual videos and not live examples. Now, this is not the first time they've talked about Copilot and gaming and all the hypothetical possibilities that it could represent. That happened sometime last year, and we're no closer to the actual reality today. But now, here they are properly announcing to the Xbox community that it's going to be a thing real soon, and they still can't show us that it actually works in a proper and useful way. But let's humor Microsoft for a moment and imagine that I actually can ask Copilot to help me with any specific aspect of a video game, from getting stuck in a puzzle to asking optimal team compositions in a sweaty team shooter. Is that tool likely to be good for video games? I'm reminded of that quote from Civilization designer Soren Johnson, who once said, quote, "Given the opportunity, players will optimize the fun out of a game," end quote. And that's kind of what I suspect will happen if Copilot does end up doing what Microsoft says it's able to do. I mean, we're already halfway there. Game Guide articles exist in abundance on the internet. In fact, it's what most games coverage is these days, which is another problem in itself. But removing all of the barriers associated with that and letting people suck the fun and discovery out of a game with a few quick words is kind of a depressing future to imagine. I don't want to drop into a game of Marvel Rivals or whatever and just find everyone blindly following whatever their Xbox AI robot told them to do. Is Copilot going to complain if you pick something off meta? Like, "I'm sorry, Dave, I can't let you pick Scarlet Witch. Her skill ceiling is too high for you. You must play Iron Man." Also, get good. Microsoft has said that Xbox insiders will begin to test Xbox's Copilot functionality in April, but the catch is you can only test it on the mobile app. And the only example of Copilot on mobile that they're giving us is the ability to ask your console to download a game for you. And it's like, bro, there's already a button that does that. You can press it faster than it would take to fucking talk to the machine. You know what I mean? Happy to be proven wrong on all this stuff, but they gotta give us more to work with than what they're currently serving up. One Microsoft thing that I'm a lot more confident will actually turn into something real is the remake of Elder Scrolls Oblivion that everyone seems to be talking about right now. So what's the story here? Well, back in 2023, someone on Reddit claiming to be a developer working for the international co-development studio Virtuous claimed they were working on an Oblivion remake using both the Unreal Engine and the original Oblivion engine in tandem. Virtuous are the folks working on Metal Gear Solid Delta, by the way. Then later, as Microsoft were acquiring Bethesda and had to go to court a bunch of times to prove they weren't going to monopolize the industry, we caught whiff of a suggested Oblivion remaster through some court documents. Earlier this year, a LinkedIn profile belonging to someone who worked at Virtuous suggested they were working on an unannounced remake in Unreal Engine 5, and then an outlet by the name of NP First published a report supposedly detailing the reworked systems. Industry insider Nate the Hate has recently claimed that a reveal is set for the coming weeks, and a release date before June is very likely, and VGC has now come out and corroborated this info with their own sources, saying it could arrive as soon as this month. Bethesda haven't said a word about all of this, at least at the time of writing, and knowing our luck, they're going to shadow drop Oblivion the minute this video goes live. There are a lot of bright, flashing arrows pointing to this one being real, so needless to say, I think we can all prepare ourselves to hear the dulcet tones of Patrick Stewart and Sean Bean once again. At least I hope so, because if they drop those performances from the game, you may as well not bother. And finally, while we're talking about game franchises with surprising celebrity cameos, Call of Duty, or rather one of the notable directors of the Call of Duty Black Ops campaigns and Zombies mode, has announced he's got a new studio, and it's a first-party PlayStation studio. On a recent bonus episode of the Jeff Gerstmann Show, Gerstmann sat down with Jason Blundell, best known for doing all the things I just said, and then starting his own studio called Deviation. Deviation announced a publishing partnership with PlayStation a couple of years ago, then it had to lay off almost 100 people and eventually it shut down. Now Blundell has resurfaced and revealed that he's got a new studio called Dark Outlaw Games. It's a first-party PlayStation studio, and they're currently staffing up for their debut game, though we didn't share any details about what that game is specifically. Quite a few former COD creative leads have set out to start their own things in recent years, but it feels like we haven't really had one that's made a huge splash. Well, except for Respawn, of course. They've made some okay games, I guess. Quick lightning round to finish off. EA is set to reveal their next Star Wars games at the Star Wars Celebration in Japan next month. This one is set to be a turn-based tactics game developed with a new outfit called Bit Reactor, who are made up of former Firaxis developers. We'll let you know what that one ends up being. While we're on Star Wars, a couple of leaders of Saber Interactive made comments this week that suggest that the troubled Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic remake is definitely still on the way. CEO Matt Karch told GameFile that it's still happening, but Disney is handling the messaging around this one, so that's why things have been quiet, and COO Tim Willits tweeted out that, quote, everything we have talked about is still in development, end quote. Outriders developer People Can Fly sent out a notice this week informing its shareholders that it's been commissioned to build a new prototype game for Sony, quote, based on the intellectual property rights owned by the publisher, end quote. Would be really interesting to see if anything comes of this one, but they are probably trying to build confidence after cancelling and scaling down a bunch of their projects recently. They are still working with the Coalition on Gears of War E-Day though. Speaking of PlayStation, one of the 5 people still playing Starfield noticed this week a PlayStation logo has popped up in the game's user-generated content web library, which lends credence to the idea that nothing is off the table for Microsoft's multi-platform publishing plans. And yes, Starfield will definitely get there eventually. Maybe even sooner than we think. Moving on to the only kind of user-generated content I played with as a kid, Lego. After licensing its stuff out to other developers for years and years, the Lego CEO told the Financial Times that it's investigating its own in-house game development capabilities. It comes after a long and very fruitful line of licensed Lego games from TT Games, though there were reports that suggest the development of the last one, the Lego Star Wars Skywalker Saga, was very, very rough indeed. Finally, some sales milestones to round things out. Split Fiction has had a very good launch week after hitting 1 million copies sold in the first 48 hours. Hazelight announced that they've now sold through 2 million copies in the first week. Let's see if they can beat It Takes Two's 20 million. Square Enix announced that their line of Final Fantasy Pixel remasters has hit 5 million total sales, and that the Final Fantasy series as a whole has sold through 200 million units to date. And meanwhile, the folks at Moon Studios also announced that the Ori series has sold 15 million copies to date. Last but not least, the folks behind Hello Kitty Island Adventure have announced that they've sold 500,000 copies in a month. Not bad for a game that just escaped subscription service jail after 2 years. So what got announced last week? Well, a hell of a lot actually. Let's start with Silent Hill F, which got its full reveal last week. So after Konami successfully managed to convince us that they maybe knew what they were doing with the series again, thanks to Silent Hill 2, they're trying to keep the ball rolling with F, which is the next mainline game in the series, only here's the catch, it's not actually set in the sleepy American town of Silent Hill. Instead, this one takes place in 1960s Japan, and you play as a young schoolgirl called Hinako, whose hometown becomes enveloped in the signature spooky fog and needs to fight monsters to survive. It'll be really interesting to see how this connects back to the main series narrative-wise, but there's been a lot of buzz about who they have on board for this one. The developers are a Hong Kong-based outfit called Neobards, who have been a co-development partner with Capcom for a while, working on stuff like Resident Evil 2 and 3 remakes. Alright, sounding pretty good so far. The primary writer they got attached to this is a guy who goes by the handle Ryukishi07, who is quite well known in the Japanese visual novel scene for his psychological horror and mystery games, and honestly, reading the descriptions of some of them, they sound pretty messed up and very on brand for Silent Hill. He's brought a couple of the composers he's worked with in the past along for the ride, and the sentiment seems to be that this guy and this setting for Silent Hill are a match made in heaven. No date for this one yet, but it is hitting all platforms bar Switch. From F to X, Ubisoft announced Rainbow Six Siege X this week, which is the major reboot they were teasing for the game's 10th anniversary. This will be a free update that will give a massive visual overhaul, add a new 6v6 mode called Dual Front. We'll finally see the game make the transition to free to play. You will need to pay to unlock rank mode if you haven't already, obviously something designed to stop cheating and smurfing. This one officially launches on June 11th for all platforms bar Switch, but a beta will be kicking off this week. Here's an interesting one. Red Thread Games, the developers behind Dustborn and Dreamfall, announced their next one, and looks very different from the narrative adventures they've done before. It's called Hello Sunshine, and it's a survival game set in a corporate post-apocalypse. The gist is that there's an enormous towering robot that is programmed to autonomously walk across a scorching desert, and for some mysterious reason, you need to work to keep up with it, using its shadow for shade during the day and its engine for warmth at night. Naturally, as a human, you need to worry about a lot more than that robot does, so there's some pressure being applied by the game's survival elements. No date for this one yet, but it is slated for PC. Not a fan of deserts? How about some water? Some high pressure water and lots of it. That's right, everyone. Power Wash Simulator 2 was announced by Future Lab, who are actually publishing this one themselves. It's slated for 2025 for PC, PS5, Xbox, and maybe Switch 2. They actually mentioned Switch 2 to Eurogamer, but instantly took it back, but you never know. Anyway, it'll have new locations, new equipment, split-screen co-op, and online multiplayer. It's a crowd pleaser. You love to see it. You know which announcement wasn't a crowd pleaser? Disco Elysium on mobile. Yep, the Shell of Zaum are adapting the acclaimed CRPG into a portrait mode game for phones, a strategy the studio spokespeople said would hopefully, quote, captivate the TikTok user, end quote. Oh man. We touched ever so briefly on the kerfuffle at Zaum last week, and yes, people mentioned in the comments that you should check out the People Make Games documentary about it if you want to learn more. And look, this mobile thing, it could be kind of interesting, I guess. Those conversations kind of do come off as DM threads you can scroll through on your phone. This one is out in mid-2025 for Android to start off with, and the first 2 chapters will be free with a single purchase to unlock the full game. Here's a neat one for anyone who still remembers Star Fox. Chuhei Labs, the Japan-based indie studio who made the great Curse to Golf, has announced they're making a spiritual successor called Wild Blue. It'll be an on-rails arcadey shooter with a story published by Humble Bundle, and wouldn't you know it, Chuhei is run by one of the original programmers of Star Fox, Giles Goddard, who incidentally was one of the first Western employees at Nintendo. I mean, if anyone was going to do it, it should have been these guys or Nintendo. Ubisoft kind of had their shot with Starlink, I guess, and then there was also that Whiskey Squadron game. That was actually pretty good. If you like your sci-fi with fewer animals and more giant, fanatical, grimdark dudes, you'll be pleased to hear that Saber Interactive very briefly confirmed that Space Marine 3 is in development last week. No other details for that one, but they've certainly got a high bar to maintain. Wishing the team all the best, and I'm sure we'll hear more about it in like 3 to 4 years, I don't know. Let's quickly breeze through some release date announcements now. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Tactical Takedown does what the title says. Mix the Ninja Turtles with turn-based tactics. This one comes from rapid-fire indie developer Strange Scaffold, and judging from the recent Steam Next Fest demo, it does a pretty good job of recreating the action and momentum of a beat-em-up game in a turn-based format. This one now has a release date May 22nd for PC. Monaco 2 is the long-awaited sequel to an extremely well-received indie heist game that came out in 2013. This one is far more ambitious in its quest to recreate the feel of pulling off an impossible heist, and all the chaos that follows when shit hits the fan. It's co-op, of course. You'll plan and scout and then infiltrate in real time, and there's also an unreliable narrator mode that shuffles the rooms around as you go, which sounds either excellent or terrible depending on who you're playing with. This one has a release date of April 10th for PC only. Let's hope it's worth the wait. Old Skies is the next point-and-click adventure game from Wadjet Eye Games, who have been keeping this specific style of game alive for decades and doing a good job of it too. This is a sci-fi epic where you play as a time-traveling agent from the future who travels to 7 different eras in history and tries to not mess things up, but mess things up you definitely will. This one's out on PC and Switch on April 23rd. Incidentally, if you're a fan of adventure games, a few weeks ago Ed wrote a big article on the Patreon about how old school point-and-click adventure games are staying alive in 2025, featuring interviews with the founder of Wadjet Eye Games and Charles Cecil, the man behind Broken Sword. That's free to read for everyone. I'll drop a link to it below the like button. If you like your adventure games a little more modern and spooky, keep an eye on Ghost Town. This is the new VR game from Fireproof, who are best known for making the excellent puzzle box game The Room. This one's a lot more ambitious. It's a single-player puzzle adventure where you're a ghost hunter set in 1980s London. This one's coming on the 24th of April for Meta Quest, with a PSVR 2 and Steam release planned for later in the year. And finally, Apple Arcade has dropped their first big announcement of the year, and they're bringing back Katamari Damacy, which hasn't seen a new game in 8 years. That's right, Bandai Namco willed this one back out as an Apple Arcade exclusive called Katamari Damacy Rolling Live, which will no doubt upset people who aren't in that ecosystem or don't play games on their phone, though Apple Arcade games are usually playable with controllers on Macs and Apple TV boxes. Plus, it'll probably escape Apple's ecosystem in 1 or 2 years, which is what happens to most of their more successful releases. Anyway, no more details on this one just yet, but it is nice to see this series making a return. A couple of quick cancellations now, both of them multiplayer shooters. Running theme here. First one is Spectre Divide. This was a 3v3 game where the stick was being able to flip between 2 characters. The game had quite a bit of backing behind it. It had former professional Counter-Strike and Valorant player Shroud backing it at one point, and it raised $35 million in funding. And now it's just shut down 2 weeks after its first season launched, with developer Mountaintop Studios now closed. They said, quote, "We haven't seen enough active players and incoming revenue to cover the day-to-day costs of Spectre and the studio. We pursued every avenue to keep it going, including finding a publisher, additional investment and or acquisition. In the end, we weren't able to make it work," end quote. The second shutdown is Star Wars Hunters, which was that hero shooter developed by Zynga for mobile and Switch. This one launched in June of last year after running in soft launch state for quite a while, and had a PC version planned for January of this year. That PC version was delayed after a couple of playtests, presumably didn't go the way the developers wanted, and now the whole thing will be shut down on October 1st. The final season will drop on April 15th, and all content will be made free, but no refunds will be given, which is a dick move. Now the game will live on only in that Donkey video, which is literally the only time I've seen gameplay of this game, so I guess that at least partly explains the shutdown. So what came out last week? Well, let's start with our radar pick from a couple of weeks back, which was Expelled from Inkle. This has earned itself an aggregate score of 84 on OpenCritic, which is the only mighty for the week. We sure know how to pick him, it's true. Here's Eurogamer, who gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Quote, "Expelled is a tighter, more focused detective story that really makes the most of its replayable time loop structure. The end result is a story you can feel shifting beneath your feet in real time, one where the state of not knowing is always pulling you forward toward its one final and frankly brilliant truth, and where you as the player are empowered to take full control over the direction it takes," end quote. Another big tick of approval from Games Hub, who gave it 4 out of 5 stars, saying, quote, "Inkle's history with narrative choice games is exemplary, but Expelled might just be my new favorite game of theirs. It's surprising, funny, strange, and deep, full of excellent writing and interesting characters and intriguing mysteries. This one's a slowly unfurling, narrative-rich puzzle box that deepens and grows stranger as you go, one that's surprisingly delightful and extremely mischievous," end quote. From highs to lows, let's check in that PC port of Rise of the Ronin, and oh man, mixed reviews on Steam, 51% positive. What's the problem, you ask? Well, aside from a bug that seems to be deleting people's saves, it's performance, of course. Here's Steam user Sea of Dreams saying, quote, "Performance is terrible. It ran just fine for the prologue, but as soon as you get into the open world, which is about 2 hours in, conveniently after the 2-hour window for Steam refunds, performance falls off a cliff. Stuttering and choppiness, even if you lower the settings. If they fix the performance, I'll change this to a recommend. No matter how fun the game is, I'm done with unoptimized PC ports. I'm done playing until they patch it," end quote. Very well said indeed. WWE 2K25 now, and this seems to have done solidly for itself, a strong OpenCritic rating of 80, and it seems to have made the wrestling fans pretty happy with its incremental updates, while still copying criticism for 2K's signature brand of in-game spending. IGN scored this one an 8 out of 10, saying, quote, "Couple of microtransaction-fueled missteps aside, WWE 2K25 is really the best wrestling game since WWE 2K24, which was also pretty great. It looks fantastic, still feels good, and there's a lot of it, including small but welcome updates like intergender matches or bigger updates like the new My Rise and Showcase modes. It's an upscale wrestling buffet, if you will. It's pretty scrumptious, there's a wide selection of dishes on the table, and you can spend an awful lot of time in the squared circle if you're not careful," end quote. Alright, so what's coming out this week? Well, needless to say, this is a pivotal week for one certain big name publisher and a momentous week for samurai fans. That's right, the newest release in the long-running, much-loved series leads the charge this week, bringing its sword-clashing action into the spotlight. And it's Bleach Rebirth of Souls. That's right, folks. The edgy anime series about teen sword fighters and demons is getting another well-deserved game adaptation, I'm told. It's a 3D fighting game, of course, and it's got everything. Big swords, teleporting, young people being edgy. I don't know shit about Bleach, but I'm told it's popular, and it's a pretty light week, so here you go. It's out on all platforms bar Switch on the 20th. And wouldn't you know it, March 20th is also the day when another much-loved, long-running series gets a new-ish game. It's a series that follows a new protagonist every time. Every game lasts for like 100 hours, and I can personally vouch for this one as being pretty damn good. I'm, of course, talking about Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition. Finally, the criminally underplayed Wii U RPG is getting a much-deserved second lease on life on the Switch. Just when you thought the Switch had run out of games, Nintendo decided to throw this endless epic out there, and man, it is an absolute banger. I don't know shit about Bleach, but I know this game is an all-timer, especially the mech-based combat. At least when you get like 40 hours into it and manage to finally unlock the mech. I promise it gets good after 40 hours, which is of course a ridiculous thing to say, but it's true, and anyone who's played this game will totally agree with me. Anyway, you should go and get this. It really is truly good. It does get better. Wait, it does get good before 40 hours, I will say that, but it gets even better after the 40-hour mark when you unlock the mech. So anyway, I sound ridiculous talking about this game, but if you know, you know. All right, moving right along. The other big March 20th release is probably the one you expected me to talk about at the top of this segment, but I have to be upfront with you, it's an absolute car crash of a game, just a total wreck. But honestly, that's probably what people were expecting from the start when they heard that Wreckfest 2 was releasing into early access on PC. Yeah, baby, from the developers of Flat Out and Wreckfest 1, these guys are continuing the Spirit of Destruction Derby style mayhem and making those full contact car crashes look better than ever. Wow, look at that damage model. Forza would never. Oh, and by the way, did you guys know that Assassin's Creed Shadows comes out this week too? Man, that one really snuck up on us, didn't it? Hey, anyway. This one is out on all platforms, bar Switch, of course, and continues the mainline RPG style of the series for better or worse. Obviously, we talked about this one at the top of the show, so we won't retread it here. But yeah, it's out, and it's a video game that you can play if you want to. There you go. Capping off this week's releases, we're giving a special shout out to Cataclysmo, which launches into 1.0 this week. This is a very nice game from the Moonlight developers that mixes RTS, siege defense, and city building. We quite like this one when it launched into early access. Austin did a write-up for it over on the Patreon, actually. Link to that below the like button. Great idea, great execution. Here's hoping the 1.0 goes just as well for them. All right, those are a bunch of pretty attractive looking games, so let's mix it up a little. Put this on your radar. Alright, I can already hear you saying, what the fuck, Ralph? What are you showing me right now? Now, this game is called Psycho Patrol R, and it's the new one from the developer who made a game called Cruelty Squad a few years ago. That game was just as ugly and surreal, but underneath was an incredibly good, non-linear immersive sim in the vein of Deus Ex, where the level design was excellent, where there were numerous ways you could approach each mission, where there was an organ-trading black market simulation in there for some reason. Overwhelmingly positive on Steam with 19,000 reviews. It's probably going to leave you with some real residual subconscious trauma. Anyway, imagine that, except now you're piloting a giant mech. Listen to this description, quote, "The battleground of the 21st century is the human brain, the base unit of the hyper-conjoined egregore twin Terra. The soul of the planet is on the verge of collapse. Your chances are 0.001%, end quote. What the hell are you talking about? If the systems and level design are as good as Cruelty Squad, then this is definitely going to be one to keep an eye on. It releases into early access on the 24th of March, and if you'd like to chuck it on your wish list, then we've left a link to it over on our Steam Curator page, which also has links to all of the other Put This on Your Radar stuff we've recently covered. I'll leave a link to all of that below the like button. Sort of free stuff time now, and on the Epic Store, you still have a chance to grab Mortal Shell, which is a pretty good My First Souls game kind of experience. But once Friday hits, it's going to be replaced by Jurassic World Evolution 2, which is a really great offering. It's a park management game from Frontier, the folks who also did the excellent Planet Coaster games, only with all the fun of keeping your visitors safe from reanimated dinosaurs. Over on PS Plus, they just added a bunch of stuff to their games catalog for extra and premium subscribers, with the headliners being UFC 5 and Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown. Great game. For premium subscribers, Sony have also added the first 3 old-school Armored Core games from the PS1 to the classic catalog for you to peruse. Apparently those games are hard as hell, but if you're a FromSoft sicko, you probably know exactly what kind of shit you're getting into before you step into it, so good luck. A few small additions to Xbox Game Pass for the end of March, the big one being Atomfall, releasing day and date on March March 27th. Austin did a preview for this one on the channel. I'll link to that below. Long story short, it's not quite British Fallout, but it does seem to be doing some interesting survival shootery type things, and it's definitely one to watch. A few smaller games dropping next week, including Mythwrecked, Ambrosia Island, and the Old School Blizzard Arcade Collection, thanks Microsoft. And if you're only on Game Pass Standard, you'll be able to get Octopath Traveler 2, which is dropping down to that tier. Lots of people will tell you that this is an all-timer JRPG from Square Enix, and if that's not your jam, then there's also Train Sim World 5. Yep, trains. So, you know, JRPGs or trains, it's all up to you. Enjoy yourself. Over on Prime Gaming this week, they're throwing up some great games. Leading the pack is a Microsoft Store code for Wolfenstein: The Old Blood, which was the shorter prequel to the New Order, but still very much worth playing for those great set pieces. You also got an Epic Games Store code for Mortal Shell, just in case you somehow missed getting it directly from Epic themselves. And finally, they've got a GOG code for Mutazioni, which I'm probably mispronouncing, but it's a nice little narrative adventure game about gardening in a weird little community. And there's also Legacy of Kain Defiance, which is the final game in the series, but maybe one day that won't be the case anymore. Our feel-good story for the week is a really good one. Last week, we had Joseph Faris on the FPS podcast, and during that show, he revealed that hidden somewhere in the game was a challenge that no one had yet found, and that only a few people on the Hazelight team could actually complete. That's how hard it was. Well, sure enough, just yesterday, two Chinese content creators, Elamay and Sharkov, completed this impossible challenge. And when they did, they were met with a very special surprise.
Wow, amazing. I'm gonna tell you one thing. If you see me in real life somewhere and you can prove to me that you actually did this challenge, I can promise you, the first one who does that, I'm gonna fly you to Sweden and show you early footage of our next game. I promise you that.
And just in case you think he was joking, he took to Twitter soon after this video was uploaded, confirming that he would make good on his promise. Quote, "Congrats for finishing the secret challenge Laser Hell in Split Fiction. Very impressive. I will keep my promise and invite you both to Sweden for an early look at our next game. We'll be in touch," end quote. A free trip to Sweden and all you had to do was play one of the best games of the year? Sounds like a pretty good deal to me. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's the show for the week. So it's time for the ceremonial smacking of the like and subscribe buttons and the ritual dinging of the notification bell. Speaking of Sweden, did you know that Skill Up videos are now on Spotify? It's true. So if you'd like to watch the videos over there with no mid-roll ads, if you're a Spotify premium subscriber, just follow the link below and click the follow button. Be sure to give a 5-star rating while you're there, because god damn it, Spotify has an algorithm too. This weekend, do look forward to a Fragpunk review from Austin, since he checked that out this past week. After that, he's moving on to Adamfall, and I'm getting ready for some big previews coming up. Excited to talk about them when the time is right, but for now, I just want to say a big thanks for watching, and a big thanks to this video's sponsor, Nvidia. So we all know Nvidia for their top-of-the-line GPU hardware. You want to buy the best, most powerful, most feature-rich GPUs on the market, then Nvidia GPUs are the obvious choice. But Nvidia do a lot more than just hardware. In fact, one of the reasons why their hardware is so powerful is because it's backed up by a range of software-based technologies that enable huge leaps forward in terms of speed, performance, and fidelity. Take full ray tracing, for example. This is a technology that simulates light like never before. It's not just more accurate reflections, it's more accurate everything. Interactions with volumetric fog effects, ambient occlusion, fill lighting, and more. Now, full ray tracing is the sort of thing that was only present in the most cutting-edge new release games, but not anymore. Recently, Nvidia released something called Nvidia RTX Remix, which is a tool that allows modders to essentially remaster games with full ray tracing while also supporting Nvidia DLSS for better performance and Nvidia Reflex for reduced latency. With RTX Remix finally emerging from beta, Nvidia has released the Half-Life 2 RTX demo to show what this tool is capable of. I have played through the demo earlier this week, and it is genuinely unbelievable how good this game looks now and how well it runs while doing it. The level of detail in the new textures is insane, and the new assets are like remake territory. Take these healing and charging stations. Look at the before and after on these. That is insane. Well, check out these textures on these bars and how much better they look. More importantly, look at how much more accurately the muzzle flash from the turret is lighting up the room. Another big change is the way that light interacts with various skin textures. RTX Skin more accurately models light as it passes through skin, with subsurface scattering producing a more realistic effect that removes the waxiness that can often occur when bright light shines on skin textures. All of this is super impressive, but the performance you can get while doing this is even crazier. Playing it on an RTX 50 series GPU, I was running this at 4K max settings, full ray tracing enabled, and I was getting upwards of 200 FPS thanks to DLSS 4 with multi-frame generation. Plus, Nvidia Reflex was working to bring down latency, so the whole thing felt incredibly crisp and responsive to play. And just to be clear, this is not a Half-Life 2 remaster. This is the same underlying game, but but RTX Remix becomes a step in the graphical rendering pipeline, and that allows it to replace old textures with new ones, add new lighting effects, and do so much more. That's what's so powerful about this tool. It allows modders to completely transform the way a game looks without having to rebuild the game from scratch. So what does this mean for non-modders such as myself and probably you? Well, it means that thanks to Nvidia, you should absolutely expect to see many more of these RTX Remix overhauls coming to your favorite classic games very soon. This tool is just released into 1.0 after being tested for over a year, so right now modders are already working with it. I'm really excited to see what the community has got cooking. It's very much what we've come to expect from Nvidia, who don't stop at just having the best hardware on the market, they're committed to having the very best, most cutting-edge software as well. To learn more about Nvidia RTX Remix, click the link in the description below, or to check out the Half-Life 2 RTX demo, just search for it over on Steam. Thanks Nvidia for sponsoring the video, and thank you for watching it.